Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be going over my must-draft rookies for the 2022 fantasy football season. Inside today's video, I'll be going in-depth into 3 different rookies who I believe are going to be must-draft candidates for your 2022 fantasy football drafts, as well as discussing their value in the long term, meaning I will both be discussing the redraft value just for the 2022 fantasy football season, as well as their longer outlook for Dynasty fantasy football. But before we could get into things, I would like to ask, if you are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, to please make sure that you do hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you leave a like on today's video. It would help us out a ton. And if you would like to follow me on Twitter, please do so at Notorious FNTSY. So without further ado, let's get into my 2022 fantasy football must-draft rookies. We will be revisiting this video after the 2022 NFL draft in a couple of weeks. So this video is prior to where we know these guys are going to be playing in at least their first couple of NFL seasons, unless obviously they end up getting traded or some shit like that. So we'll begin with Drake London, wide receiver of the USC Trojans. Drake London played 3 seasons at USC and had his true breakout season in 2021, which was last college football season. At 20 years old, he played in only 8 games due to the fact that he ended up getting hurt, which is something that we will be talking about a little bit later. In that season, he had 88 receptions on 124 targets for 1,084 yards and 7 touchdowns. Again, remember, this is only in 8 games, and he had a 24.80% target share in the USC offense. This guy was the clear focal point, the clear number 1, the clear alpha in this USC offense. You don't get 24.80% target share in any offense if you aren't very, very talented. Think about his season, and you can kind of almost compare it to a Michael Thomas season from a couple of years ago, where this guy was just seeing so many targets every single game. Those are the numbers that Drake London was putting up at USC. Now, the injury that London did end up suffering was a fractured ankle. All reports that I have seen based upon his injury are pointing towards his rehab process going very well. While he did not end up participating in the NFL Combine a couple of weeks ago, he is expected to take part in his own pro day with USC on April 5th, which is next week. So if you had any worries about him potentially missing time in training camp, missing the rookie camps, missing OTAs, missing even the preseason, maybe even some regular season games, that should not be an issue at all. There is in my opinion, like a 0% chance that he ends up missing anytime really at all. Obviously, I have to bring up the fact that he was hurt, because otherwise there'd be no reason for him to only play in 8 games. But again, to me, it is a non-factor when you're trying to debate how good of a wide receiver Drake London could be at the NFL level. So to me, he looks like the best wide receiver in the NFL draft in 2022, but you can obviously argue that there are a couple of other wide receivers who may be the quote-unquote best wide receiver in your opinion. He has great route running abilities, despite the fact that Drake London isn't necessarily one of those wide receivers that is just going to leave a motherfucker in the dust, right? He is not a Tyreek Hill-like wide receiver, but that isn't necessarily a knock on his game, and that doesn't also necessarily mean that he can't end up being a deep down the field threat at the next level in the NFL. His yards per reception were 12.3 in 2021. So again, the numbers and the film both point to the fact that he is not this crazy deep down the field threat that's just going to be burning guys. But again, that doesn't mean that he can't elevate to play that well. I do not expect him to run a super fast 40 when he does end up running those pro day drills, but that doesn't mean that he's necessarily a super slow wide receiver either, right? He's not like a turtle out there. Overall, he seems like a fantastic player who, if he ended up not getting hurt that last year, he probably would have been the consensus number 1 overall wide receiver in the 2022 NFL draft class. So I am very confident in the skill set that Drake London possesses. Again, not some super deep down the field burner wide receiver, but he is able to make contested catches, and he is a wide receiver that, if he's able to be the 1 or the number 2 wide receiver on any team in the NFL, I really do believe that Drake London possesses the skill set to be a top 12 wide receiver in fantasy football in 2022. Going forward, again, the injury should not really do anything to him. We did talk about the injury, but that doesn't really have any effect on my thought process on Drake London. I think going forward past the 2022, his rookie season, I believe that he could end up being one of these upper echelon wide receivers. So if I was sitting number 1, number 2 overall in my rookie draft, and it wasn't a super flex draft, I would definitely be considering Drake London up there. Now, obviously, I've said obviously like 12 fucking times in this video, but when you do your rookie draft, typically it's after the NFL draft, so you will actually know where he landed. Again, that is why we are going to be revisiting this video after the 2022 NFL draft. The next player I want to be discussing in today's video is Malik Willis, quarterback of Liberty. But before we can go ahead and break down my next must-draft rookie, I would like to let you guys know about our sponsor of today's video, and our sponsor is UnderDog Fantasy, and they are known for their NFL best ball tournaments. However, UnderDog does not stop there. UnderDog has plenty of other contests for you to compete in, including live draft contests, as well as pick'ems that you can make up to 20 times. 20x your entry fee. Use promo code Awesemo. Promo code Awesemo. I'm pointing to it on the screen right now to get a first match deposit bonus of up to $100. You can also click the link in the video description at the bottom of the description, and you can go ahead and activate the offer that way. So please make sure you guys go ahead today and get started on UnderDog Fantasy. So the next player I want to discuss, like I said, Malik Willis, quarterback of Liberty. Malik Willis initially went to Auburn for 2 years, but he did end up transferring to Liberty in 2020, where he became the starter of the team, playing 10 games in his junior year in 2020, throwing 170 completions on 265 attempts for 2,250 passing yards and 20 touchdowns, with just 6 INTs on the year, 6 interceptions. He also had 141 rushes for 944 rushing yards and 14 total touchdowns. So he had 34 total touchdowns on the season, 14 rushing touchdowns and 20 passing touchdowns. So then the next season's coming up, and there is definitely a lot of people that are not really looking at Malik Willis as this top-end NFL quarterback, as a guy that is going to be getting a huge push in the 2022 NFL draft. And the consensus, which we are going to be talking about in a couple of minutes, is that there are 0 quarterbacks that are worthy of being that number 1, number 5 overall pick in the 2022 NFL draft. But it seems like everyone right now, based upon what they saw in the 2021 college football season, seem to be very in on quarterback Malik Willis. So the next season, which is 2021, he had 207 completions on 339 attempts for 2,857 yards and 27 touchdowns with just 12 INTs. He also had 197 rushes for 878 yards and 13 rushing touchdowns. So again, while his 2020 campaign was great, in 2021, he went that next step up, right? 2020 is here if you're watching on the video. 2021 is right above that. So he is getting even better. He scored 40 total fucking touchdowns in 2021 at Liberty. So again, going into the 2021 college football season, there was no clear quarterback one, and there was a lot of talk about there not really being a guy that's really worthy of that upper echelon, meaning like a top 10 first round pick. That narrative has been completely torched, been completely eviscerated, and it seems like everyone and their mother is on board with Malik Willis being the clear quarterback number 1 in the 2022 NFL draft, as well as potentially being a top 5 draft pick with his arm strength, which looks amazing. If you guys see the clips out of the pro day, out of the combine, this dude can sling the rock like fucking Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, while at the same time having the rushing ability of a quarterback like Kyler Murray, like Lamar Jackson. So Malik Willis is looking like the perfect quote-unquote Konami quarterback, meaning the cheat code quarterback, because he has the rushing upside and the passing upside, and rushing upside is so important in fantasy football. Guys like Tom Brady typically aren't super amazing in fantasy football, not because they're not a great quarterback, but because they don't have the rushing upside. You just get so much value. You throw the ball for 25 yards, you get 1 point. You run the ball for 10 yards, you get 1 point. Most leagues, 4-point passing touchdown. You rush in a touchdown as quarterback, you get 6 points. So there is just a huge gap when it comes to fantasy football production because of the fact that they can run the football. So if Malik Willis ends up landing in a spot where he can play day 1, then this guy can be phenomenal in 2022. Now, there is definitely a chance that he gets drafted to some team, maybe the Steelers, and he's riding the bench. He's riding the pine. And then we come back and we're looking at, oh, Nick, who's your must-draft rookie in 2022 in the next video after the NFL draft? And then maybe I say, maybe calm your titties down a little bit on Malik Willis. But that doesn't mean that for a dynasty standpoint, I don't think Malik Willis can be dangerous for multiple seasons in a row when it comes to Dynasty Fantasy Football. So again, if Malik Willis doesn't land in the best spot, maybe he doesn't get to start day one, that's okay for Dynasty, but obviously that will immensely hurt his value in terms of redraft fantasy football. So now we go ahead and move on to my final must-draft rookie of today's video, and that is going to be Jameson, not the drink, Jameson Williams, wide receiver of the Alabama Crimson Tide. Jameson Williams transferred from the Ohio State University after playing 2 years there in 2019 and 2020. In those 2 years, he wasn't very involved in that offense, having just 15 receptions on 29 targets for 266 yards and 3 touchdowns in just those 2 years combined. But last year at Alabama, the fucking floodgates opened as this guy was dominant. He was dominant and playing at an extremely high level at a team that plays at an extremely high level, playing in 15 games, having 79 receptions on 118 targets for 1,572 yards and 15 receiving touchdowns, while having a 20.67 target share in an elite offense. This guy was very important and one of the bigger reasons as why Alabama was such a good team last season. Obviously, they ended up losing to Georgia in the national championship, but that's not really going to be some type of knock on Jameson Williams, as he did end up getting hurt in that game, which we will be discussing. He also had 352 special team yards last season and 2 touchdowns. While there is no way to know right now, right? Is he going to be returning kicks, punts in the NFL? Maybe, maybe not. But what that does tell me is that he's a very talented athlete, as you can't just show up at Alabama and return punts, right? You have to be a very skilled athlete. Sadly, like I said, his season did end up coming to a close in the national championship in that natty game up against the Georgia Bulldogs as he tore his ACL. Now, the biggest difference between Drake London and obviously Jameson Williams' injury is that Drake London's injury isn't very severe, right? He's going to be perfectly fine. Jameson Williams tore his fucking ACL, so obviously that's a little bit more serious. This led to him not being able to test at the combine, of course. Williams himself did say, though, that he is ahead of schedule, and he personally believes that he'll be able to return a little bit earlier than what you would project for a typical ACL tear. Now, this injury obviously will make him fall down the draft board in the 2022 NFL draft, as well as in your fantasy football drafts, even if he is not able to return for a couple of weeks into the season, which, again, seems like he will be able to return relatively early based upon what he said. He could still be a very solid wide receiver in the NFL for years to come and could potentially be a basically free pick in your fantasy football draft, and you just hold him on your fucking bench for a couple of weeks until he ends up returning. So with Jameson Williams, I wouldn't necessarily say that he's must draft in 2022 based upon what we know in terms of redraft, because he probably will be missing a couple of games. But in terms of Dynasty Fantasy Football, while he tore his ACL, this isn't the 1980s, right? We're in 2022. These ACL tears aren't as terrible. Obviously, it's bad that he tore his ACL. Obviously, if you could hop in the time machine and you're Jameson Williams, you don't want to tear your ACL. Obviously. But, Nick, how many times can you say obviously in a fucking video? I know, I'm sorry. But it's pretty clear that he wouldn't have wanted to tear his ACL. But at the end of the day, it's not going to greatly affect him, right? The doctors, the medicine today is just amazing. His biggest strength is being a deep threat. So even in 2022, if he plays, say, just 10 games, he could still have 3-4 boom games that help you win your week. Overall, I feel as though he's almost being underrated right now because of that ACL tear, and I am very confident in Jameson Williams. If he's healthy in 2022, I'm healthy drafting him in my regular redraft league, or I'm confident drafting him in my regular redraft leagues. Thank you guys all so much for watching today's video. If you did end up enjoying, make sure you hit that like button as well as that subscribe button, and leave a comment down below on who your favorite must-draft rookie is for 2022. Make sure you guys go ahead and check out UnderDog. Again, promo code Awesemo, or click the link in the video description. I love you guys all so much. Hope you have a great rest of your guys' day, and as always, goodbye!